Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode, yet again, of Mondays with Mundy. And that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. Long time no see in my third floor garret at home, otherwise known as my library. I've been doing a lot of in-house or on-location videos, and I hope you've enjoyed all of those different episodes. But we're going back to the PowerPoint via Zoom this afternoon, so we'll see what happens. So, ever since the Phillies hired a new general manager, or club baseball team manager, forgive me, it's been a very different team. And the Phillies are fun to watch again, and baseball's exciting again in Philadelphia. So I thought we would do something on the Union League of Baseball. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the connections that there are to our native pastime from the 19th century up to the present. So without further ado, let's jump into the deep end of the pool and see what we find, okay? All right, so let me pull up my PowerPoint. Haven't done this in a while, so forgive me. Got to share screen. All right, here we go. There's that. Share that. Hit that. Whoa, I haven't done this in months, and it worked. How do you like that? All right, so what better title than Take Me Out to the Ball Game, to the ballpark, and take me out to the game? So baseball in the Union League. So would you believe that the first recorded baseball game involving the Union League or league members took place on June the 23rd of 1894? And this is the invitation that we have in our archival collection. And as you can see, it came from the House Committee, but it went to the member and the ladies to attend a game of baseball between members of the league at the Philadelphia ballpark. Broad and Huntington, or today, actually would think of Broad and Lehigh as more of a geographic location, but it was on a Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. So most of us, if you've grown up in Philadelphia and you knew your stadiums to some extent, think of that more or less as the Baker Bowl, for what that's worth. And we'll get to talk about that in just a minute or two. But anyway, so that's the invitation. This is the scorecard, if you can believe it. So if you've been following the series, you know we have something in the league called a club table. It's like a fraternity or sorority inside the league. It's an eating club within inside the league itself. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the Kettle Club, which was the very first of these eating clubs, formed in 1884. And then on the right-hand side, we simply have members of the league. Now, looking at the Kettle Club team, the only name that's familiar is the very first one, the center fielder, Mr. Flanagan. Apparently, he was an all-around athlete. I mean, he won a couple of pool championships at the league, played baseball, did other athletic kinds of things. And then on the Union League team, there are three names that stand out. The two Diston brothers, you can see them, Joseph and William, shortstop and center field, and then also George W. Elkins, the second baseman. And you put those three guys together, and you're looking at a lot of Philadelphia industrial and economic history and wealth. So you never know. You didn't know that the rich guys could play baseball, did you? Anyway, but they could and they did. And the shame of it all, though, is that we have no idea. We've never seen a filled out scorecards. We don't even know who won the game itself. But it's just fun to know that they actually played baseball in Philadelphia at the Baker Bowl, as we know it, in 1894. But let's take a look at the Baker Bowl. That's it as it looked at the time of the game. Now, it would be on if you're thinking of the intersection of Broad and Lehigh, the Baker Bowl was in the southwest corner. So Lehigh was at the north end of the stadium. Broad Street was on the east, Huntington on the south, and 15th on the west. All right, there you go. All right, and as you can see, the Reading Railroad, literally by means of a subway, ran underneath the corner of the baseball field. All right, wonderful map, isn't it? Love maps. Okay. And then shortly, just literally weeks after the league played its game there, the stadium went up in smoke, as happens so often with wooden buildings. And of course, it was rebuilt. This is what it looked like after it was rebuilt. And what made it unique is that it was the first stadium to use exterior brick walls and steel beam construction, considered at that point to be fireproof. So, and of course, Shibe Park, when it opened in 1909, on Lehigh Avenue at 21st, would be the first true fireproof stadium in the country. but that was for the A's. Different team, different era. Anyway, so as you can imagine, the Philadelphia Park or National Ballpark went through a few different iterations, and this is the one that was used by the Phillies up until 1938. And so that's, and again, on the right-hand side is Huntington, upper right-hand side is the, as you can see, it's the right field wall, that's Broad Street. And of course, 15th Street on the left, and at the bottom left is 15th, I'm sorry, top is Lehigh. And that's what it looked like. Okay, and you can see, now this is more of a passenger car yard up in the upper right-hand corner from the Reading Railroad, but you can see the subway going underneath the intersection at Broad and Lehigh itself. So, well, the Baker Bowl was used until 1938 by the Philadelphia Phillies. And at that point in time, oh, here we go. Baseball, North Philadelphia was the home of baseball, and for decades in Philadelphia, really until they closed Scheid Park in 1970, and the vet opened in 1971 in South Philadelphia. Here you have Scheid Park in the lower left-hand corner, and again, that's Lehigh Avenue running from top to bottom. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can just see the Baker Bowl on Broad Street, which would run from right to left. All right, and in the upper right-hand corner, that brilliant, that bright-looking building is actually the North Broad Street Station, the Reading Railroad Company, designed by none other than League member Horace Trumbauer. I had to get some architecture in, sorry. I can't help myself. So anyway, so, all right, who owned the Phillies when they left the Baker Bowl? And that happened to be a Union League member named Gerald Paul Nugent Sr., 1892 to 1970. Now, this is Nugent in his World War I uniform, because he fought in the American Expeditionary Force in France. And when he came back to Philadelphia, he became a leather manufacturer and a shoe merchant, and did well for a kid from Northeast, from North Philadelphia. Basically, he went to Northeast High School. No college that I could find, but he did do okay in terms of whom he married. He married May Mallon, M-A-L-L-N, and May was the secretary for the owner of the Philadelphia Phillies, a guy named William Baker, B-A-K-E-R, hence the Baker Bowl, because when he owned the Phillies, he had control of the stadium and named it after himself. Now, Baker was known as being, shall we say, parsimonious, cheap, didn't spend a lot of money on his team, which led to some really, really poor teams up until he died in 1932. Now, in between, in 1925, Mr. Nugent was introduced to Mr. Baker, and Mr. Baker took a shine to Mr. Nugent, realized he was a bright young kid, bright young guy, and hired him as his assistant in 1925. And with that, Nugent would begin his baseball career while still trying to manage his other businesses at the same time. And Nugent was just the opposite of Baker. He actually knew sports, he knew baseball, he was good with money, and he understood baseball talent as well. Eventually, he would be responsible for signing Chuck Klein to a Phillies contract, one of the great outfielders in the first half of the 20th century in American baseball. So Nugent is now managing the team. Baker dies in 1930. He leaves 700 shares to his wife, 500 shares to May Mallon, which seems awfully generous, but that's what, as I understand it. And in the meantime, a guy named Charlie Ruck would run the team as the managing partner, managing officer, if you will, but Nugent's really running it behind the scenes. Ruck would retire in 1932, and at that point, Mrs. Baker gave control of the team to Gerald Nugent. She would die shortly after, but she would leave her shares to the Nugent family. So they now have the controlling interest in the Philadelphia Phillies, and so Gerald Nugent Sr. now becomes the president and managing officer for the Phillies. Now, the problem, though, is that he inherited a team that had no money, had very little talent, had the worst stadium in America at this point in time, because it was rebuilt in 1895 and modernized once or twice, but still, it was just considered, it was the worst stadium, bar none, in all the country. And try as he will, and as hard as he tried, Nugent just couldn't make ends meet. At one point, he was even borrowing money from his own salary, against his own salary, just to pay for the team. He was borrowing money from the National League to pay for team expenses, and it was just a no-win situation. So in 1942, he negotiates with Bill Veeck, who most of us would know if you're at least my age in your 60s, was the owner of the Cleveland Indians and the Chicago White Sox, and a character in baseball, a real character when baseball could use a few characters perhaps. And Veeck, his plan was to bring in some Negro League players to fill the roster for the Philadelphia Phillies. And when the baseball commissioner, who should have been alive during the 1860s and the Civil War in the Deep South. I mean, he was a convinced segregationist. Kennesaw Mountain Landis was his name. And when he got news of that, he put his foot down and he went to the president of baseball, Fort Frick, and said, oh, that's not going to happen in Philadelphia. And it did not. And that forced Nugent's hand. And so he, at this point, the National League has control of the Philadelphia Phillies, and they will sell the team in 1942 to a lumber merchant named William Cox, who would lose the team 5 years later when he was found guilty of betting on Philadelphia Phillies baseball games. Why? There's a story that never ends, is it? So Gerald Nugent, member of the Union League, owner of the Philadelphia Phillies, and Nugent would die in 1970. But it's a shame. He didn't have it, the odds were against him. So what happens next? All right, the Carpenter dynasty, if you will, begins with Robert R.M. Carpenter Sr. He was born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, northeast corner of the state, graduated from MIT, bright guy. 1906, goes to work for the DuPont company, and actually specifically for Pierre DuPont, who was running it. He would also get to know and work for Pierre's brother Irénée. And so he is embedded in the DuPont company. And at the same time, in 1906, he marries a DuPont. So not only is he embedded in the business, but now he's embedded in the family. So Robert R.M. Carpenter Sr., well-intentioned, but just didn't live long enough to really do a lot with it when he bought the club in 1940. Actually, the day that Cox sold it was the same day that Carpenter bought it. All right, it was November the 23rd, 1943. So the first thing he knew he had to do with such a bad team was do something positive, and so he tried to change the name. In 1944, they had a contest in Philadelphia, and the winning selection was the Blue Jays. Now, there's some debate whether it became the official team name or not, but regardless, the Phillies named their 3 minor league teams all after the Blue Jays. The Phillies still remain the team name with the Blue Jays as a secondary name, and in theory, that was the official name until 1950, but we went back to being the Phillies again. But Robert Carpenter Sr., who was known as Ruley, at the time he bought the Phillies in 1943, made his son, Robert Carpenter Jr., the team president. And he's the one who's going to have the most influence because Sr. simply would only live for 6 years. And there was only so much he could do. So this is Robert R.M. Carpenter Jr. And if you were growing up in my generation, again, I'm a baby boomer, you knew Ruley Carpenter. I mean, you had to, because he was the one who owned the Phillies, who ran the Phillies from 1949 until he sold it, or he gave control of the team to his son, who was the third, in 1972. So now, Robert M. Carpenter Jr., who was a really good baseball guy. He knew what he was doing, he knew his talent, and he had the money to do it. And he was willing to spend the money that previous owners couldn't spend at all. And the result was that in 1950, we have the Whiz Kids. And they won the National League pennant for the first time for the Phillies won a pennant in 35 years. Think of some great names. Think of Richie Ashburn, probably one of the all-time great names in Philadelphia baseball. Just because he was alive when we were all alive. But think of Del Ennis, Robin Roberts, the great pitcher. Andy Semenuk, the catcher. My gosh, I'm forgetting a whole ton of them at this point in time. But they were a good team. But they were kind of a one-year wonder because now they won the National League championship, but they were defeated by the New York Yankees, and they got swept in 4 games. That's nothing to be ashamed of because the Yankees won 5 pennants in a row. So they were obviously the domineering team of that era in the first half of the 1950s. But nonetheless, but Carpenter kept trying. He was spending his money, and he would continue to spend his money. And eventually, in 1964, probably one of the most painful years of Philadelphia history, the Phillies had, a 6.5 game lead with 10 games to go, and they lost. They lost it in the last day. They lost the pennant by one darn game. But that team was full of names that we all recognize. I think probably more than even the 50s, the Whiz Kids. So think of Gene Walk as the manager, but think of pitchers. Geez, who do you have? Chris Short, Art Mahaffey, had Jack Bulchin, the screwballer, Dennis Bennett. I mean, some really good guys there. Then you had Johnny Callison in the outfield, Wes Covington, Tony Taylor, Cookie Rojas, Johnny Callison, Clay Dalrymple, one of my all-time favorite catchers. I mean, just a cast of really wonderful players that only Philadelphia could appreciate and deserve in some ways, perhaps. But nonetheless, though, after '64, those Phillies didn't do a whole lot either, unfortunately. And then in 1972, Ruley Jr. would give control of the Phillies to his son, the third, who never joined the league, unfortunately. So grandfather, father, members of the league, grandson did not join the league. So in the meantime, though, during Ruley Jr.'s tenure at the Phillies, some stuff was going on at the league in terms of baseball. So 1950, right after World War II, there was a philanthropy called the Boys Work Committee. And they would give good citizenship awards to boys in the greater Philadelphia area. And they had a big dinner at the league. And so here we have 1959 Boys Work dinner with the dean of American baseball at that point, Cornelius McGillicuddy himself, Connie Mack, who was the owner and manager of the Philadelphia A's until he sold them in 1953, I believe. So Connie Mack was a frequent guest at the league himself at some of these affairs. And in 1960, we recognize a gentleman third from the left, Richard M. Nixon, who was running for president that year. And the other gentleman on the far left, M. Bruce Wallace, wonderful member of the league. Then you have Daniel Lehman in the glasses, smiling, just one of the all-time great managers, club managers in the country. Richard Nixon, don't know the gentleman with his back to us. And on the far right-hand side, Dr. Russell Hewer, after whom the Hewer Room and the Heritage Center is named, as a matter of fact. And what did they do? Baseball with Dick. Here we go. That's what it was called, Baseball with Dick. Because Dick Nixon loved his sports and he loved his baseball. And so this was the form that you used to reserve your tickets. And how do you like that? So, but they made it was a big to-do. They had a dinner at the league. They had a band, as you can see, Count Basie and Company, pre-game entertainment, pretty good stuff. And it was a great success. So at least from the league's perspective, but of course, Mr. Nixon did not win the election that year. That was won by John Kennedy instead. But baseball was still forefront at the league. And then here we have, this is 1971. You can see the league is now buying, actually beginning in the 1950s, the league would buy blocks of tickets at Shibe Park and for the members. And they would come into the league, they would have dinner, they would get bussed up and back. And as you can see, a pretty good collection of teams, the Giants, the Pirates, the Cards, the Reds, the Expos, all teams that are still around today. Okay. And for dinner, now this is the game against the Giants. You can see, let's see, prime rib, the dinner for $5.45. Cheese, filet, $6.75. I'm there. So that was Friday, May the 16th of 1969. And this is the 1972 season with the tickets. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 games. Wow. I'm sorry, 6 games. Again, the traditional old National League teams. Game tickets and transportation, $5.75. Can you imagine that? A baseball ticket and transportation for $5, right? Almost $6, if you will. And as you can see, the prices haven't gone up a whole lot more on the menu on the right-hand side. So baseball was very much embedded in the athletic culture of the league itself. And then, for those of you who are old enough to remember, one of the all-time great announcers in Philadelphia Phillies history is a guy named By Sum. He was originally, you can see, from Fort Worth, Texas, but man, did he hit it big in Philadelphia. As a kid, I can still remember listening to him broadcast games over the radio and then, of course, television. And he had a really wonderful, distinctive voice. That was just a pleasure to listen to. And so on October 22nd of 1970, you can see the Phillies had a special dinner in his honor to wish him goodbye and good luck. So that's the front and the back. And what they also reproduced in that program was by Som's internal scorecard for the game itself versus the Mets. And you can see they played the Mets on September 28th of 1975. So that be the vet. And he has the umpires written down. He's got all the players. And again, if you're a Phillies fan, obviously, which we all are, look at that. You look at the Phillies lineup. Cash, Boa, Jay Johnston, Mike Schmidt. My eyes aren't going to figure. Larry Christensen was pitching. Hot dogs. Wonderful teams and wonderful players at the same time. So that is something I think extraordinary that the league had done. Now, here we go. That's young Ruley Carpenter, the third on the left-hand side. And at one point, he understood that baseball economics was not something he wanted to do with. He thought that it was just getting too expensive and he wanted nothing more to do with it. And so he sold the team in 1981 to I won't call it a conglomerate, but a group of partners. The senior partner of whom was Bill Giles on the right-hand side. And Bill Giles came from an old baseball family. His father, Warren Giles, at one point was the president of the Cleveland Indians, was the Cincinnati Reds. Oh my God, I think of the Indians, and later become president of the National Baseball League. So a baseball family already. And Giles inherited his father's baseball genes. And so he joined the Phillies in 1969 as assistant for operations. And within just a few years, he was climbing up the ladder to executive vice president, partner, and then chairman. And it didn't take long. Giles knew his baseball inside and out, was a great personality. He joined the league in 1974. And every spring, he would have a luncheon at the league to talk about the Phillies prospects for the spring and what that might look like for the season and stuff like that. So, so in 1981, he becomes the controlling partner. He would eventually rise to the position of chairman. In 1997, that's when he became chairman as well. And he wouldn't really sell the rest of his shares until 2012, and he would really give up any control he had left of the Philadelphia Phillies. But in the meantime, I think the city, and really he ran a good ship. He really did. But he had good people working for him at the same time, which is where I'm going next, because the next great Philadelphia Phillies guy was this guy, Dave Montgomery, who was also a league member. And I was always impressed because I never met Mr. Giles very frequently at the league house. And I just didn't have the chance to run across him, but I met Dave Montgomery a number of times. And I was always impressed that he remembered my name every time. That's just the kind of guy he was. He was from Roxborough, blue collar kid, used a family inheritance for his tuition money at William Penn Charter School of all places. For a kid from Roxborough, that's a high climb, if you will. And he was part of that 1981 group of partners who went into the Phillies itself. Now, as Giles kept going further up and up the ladder, Montgomery went right behind him, if you will. All right, and then by 1971, he had become, he was going literally, he became, he became a business associate, like a sales apprentice. That's when he started his career at the Phillies. So he's already on board when Giles comes on board at the same time, or shortly after Giles worked for the Phillies. So the two of them grew up together in the same time, and they shared very much the same, I think, passion and commitment to the Phillies. And then Montgomery would eventually go through the ranks, as you can imagine as well, and he would become general manager, president, and CEO. Actually, first he became CEO in 1992, and then up the corporate ladder after that. And in his 18 years of really hands-on control of Phillies, he won 5 division pennants, 2 pennants. He won the 2008 World Series on his watch. He also helped build a new stadium, which everybody wanted because they hated the vet, and that opened it. So that's what we now know as, that's the great ball field. I forget. Oh my gosh, I'm having my first senior moment. It's the baseball stadium in South Philly, just in case you're wondering. Okay, and Citizens Bank Park. I'm sorry. And then also he negotiated a $2.5 billion television deal for the Philadelphia Phillies. So the man knew his business. But then regretfully in 2014, he was diagnosed with jaw cancer, was operated on. And by 2015, he had joined the ranks of emeritus chairman with Bill Giles. And that left room for this guy here, and not the guy on the left. This is John Middleton. And, Middleton's a Philadelphia kid. Well, he grew up in the suburbs. He went to the Haverford School, graduated in 1978, and would eventually graduate from Harvard Business School with an MBA. So obviously a bright guy, but business brains ran in his family. His ancestors started the Middleton Tobacco Company in 1857. And when this John sold it in the early 20th century, sold it for $2.2 billion, I believe it was. So he knew how to run a company and he knew how to make it work. And he knew, but he knew money as well. And so when Dave Montgomery, if you will, relinquished his role as chairman in 2015, John Middleton then stepped into the void. I mean, at that point, he was already the day-to-day operations manager of the Philadelphia Phillies, if you will. So he was running it at that point in time. And then in 1994, actually, he'd already bought 15% of the Philadelphia Phillies. So he is a co-owner. And then at the same time that he takes over in 2015, his stake in the team went up to 48%. All right. So here is a man who is definitely committed to the Philadelphia Phillies. I just like this because he doesn't have as much of a public face, I think, as either Bill Giles or Dave Montgomery did, but he's there. Don't ever underestimate his commitment to the Philadelphia Phillies. And as we've seen this year alone, actually, we've seen it by just look at the managers. I mean, he's gone through a couple of managers until he finds the right one, and it looks like he might have found the right one right now with Thompson. So we'll see what happens there. But he's a man, he like the Carpenters and like Giles Montgomery, he's going to spend some money. He's already been spending it. And hopefully, it's not a perfect ball team by any stretch, but it's a far better team than it was just a few months ago. So I think we all owe Mr. Middleton the benefit of the doubt, shall we say, and hope that what he's been doing this year in terms of spending money to bring in at least some offense will pay off. And maybe next year, I doubt it will happen this year because the Mets are just too good, obviously, but maybe next year the Phillies will do a whole lot better, and who knows after that. So it's good to know that Union League members are still in control of the Philadelphia Phillies. So that's the end of this broadcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you didn't fall asleep. I haven't done one like this in a while, so I'm probably talking a little bit too much, but nonetheless, though, but we appreciate your patronage and your interest in these episodes. There's one coming up on the Union League National Golf Course in Swainton, New Jersey, at the Jersey Shore. So hope to look at that one, and we'll be doing some more fun stuff as time goes on. So thanks again for watching. It's getting warm again, so stay cool, everybody, and take care and stay well. Goodbye.